Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, I
Appreciate it.
spend more time driving to the airport than I do to fly to get here.
Oh my
Flying
goodness.
time is less to get here than it is to drive to the airport.
That's crazy.
Let's get rolling. So, Dr. Gabbard, self-introduction, please.
Well, I live in Glendive, Montana. I started chiropractic college in the fall of 1975. I grew up in a very chiropractic-oriented family. Come from a family of 9 kids. We've all had a lifetime of chiropractic care. I can comfortably say that I've never gone more than a month without a chiropractic adjustment since I was 2.
Since you're 2.
Since I was 2, yeah.
Every
So-
month since you're 2.
Yeah, at least every month, if not more frequent than that.
Oh, and who's doing these adjustments for you?
Uh, lots of different chiropractors in my life, especially when I was younger, but most of my younger career was with a chiropractor from Bismarck, North Dakota by the name of Dr. Carol Winkler. And he was the one that told me that when I stopped to visit him after my first month or 2 in chiropractic school, he says, if you want to learn how to adjust, you need to get to the Mount Horeb to Gonstead seminar. So that's what I did.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to meet some amazing mentors in the chiropractic profession since I got involved with the Gonstead work.
So let me get into that because mentorship, it's a big part of a lot of industries, a lot of professions, but specifically Gonstead Chiropractic Care.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your relationship with your mentors and what that's done for you on your journey.
Okay. Well, when I went to school at Northwestern College in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and shortly after I had learned what Dr. Winkler told me about getting involved with the Gonstead work, I asked if there was any of the students that were practicing or using the Gonstead technique, and I found one of the student interns in the outpatient clinic that was using it by the name of Dr. Charlie Ward, an amazing chiropractor, that he was interning with Dr. John Thatcher in the Twin Cities, who was one of Dr. Gonstead's pupils. And Dr. Thatcher had come to North. We talked to Dr. Ward at that time to talk to Dr. Thatcher. We got him to come to Northwestern to do an after-school seminar after he got off work, and that meant it was after 8 o'clock because Dr. Thatcher was just like Dr. Gonstead, that he was never on time. He was at least an hour behind in his schedule. And Dr. Thatcher came to the school and we did an evening seminar or workshop, and Dr. Thatcher was showing us how to make a cervical adjustment, and he just sold us on it. I said, I wonder how many other technique instructors or people that practice a certain technique are this willing to give of their time without anything in return other than thank you for your time. And Dr. Thatcher fit that to a T. And as I went through school at Northwestern, I can honestly say that I spent more hours in Dr. Thatcher's office than I did in school. There's times where I would leave school and spend the time in Dr. Thatcher's office and follow him around.
And so Dr. Thatcher directly learned from Dr. Gonstead. Is that correct?
Yeah, yep.
And so you learned or mentored, tutelage, however you want to say it, under Dr. Thatcher.
Yeah.
So, but you've never directly
Yeah. So
with Dr. Gonstead.
Yeah. Dr. Thatcher spent a lot of time. Dr. Thatcher, along with Dr. Larry Troxel and my most important mentor in my life, Dr. Gary Foff, were very, very close. The 3 of them did a lot of things together. They even would spend time together at either in Montana or Iowa or in the Twin Cities together for a weekend, just talking about what Dr. Gonstead had taught him.
And so, a couple of things, because yesterday when we were all out there, you mentioned, there's kind of a Q&A and a panel, and I remember you got up and said, these guys are just giving it to you. And you just mentioned, like, just thank you for your time. So, and if someone was like, hey, what did it say? To whom much is given, much is expected. So there's a lot of this giving, and giving. So kind of expand on that for me. What do you feel is like this giving nature of Gonstead chiropractic care?
Well, I think that was, Dr. Gonstead had to be just short of being coerced by Dr. Phyllis Markham, to do the seminar, to teach what he did. But he was never looking for anything in return. He just wanted more people to have the type of chiropractic care that they needed. So I think they all learned from Dr. Gonstead that you have to give. And the more people that know and understand how to do this technique and use the system that Dr. Gonstead developed, the more humanity is going to benefit. And so I followed that, and I do it. I love being here. I can remember when I was a young chiropractor, just like some of the young doctors that are some of the teachers this weekend and stuff, that I spent my time, young doctors that are teaching these classes, that I helped teach them how to make an adjustment. It's kind of cool. And if it wouldn't have been for my mentor, Dr. Foff, who was very, very close with Dr. Gonstead, the scope you see in the showcase out in the reception room, that was Dr. Gonstead's scope that was given to Dr. Foff, and Dr. Foff gave it back to the foundation to put it in the case.
And so, what would you say for you, Dr. Gabbard, what is the most rewarding part of your work?
The most rewarding part is helping young students and young doctors be better adjusters. That's what turns my crank.
And what is it that when you see these young up-and-coming doctors and chiropractors, when you see them struggling, when you see them like giving up, or just like, this ain't for me, whatever the case is, and you see them like on the fence of just not doing it, what do you say to them?
I said, you stick with me, and the next time we get together, you'll be a better adjuster. You just need more time to be patient with yourself and never give up. Because I can show you from experience that every student, every doctor that we've worked with, is the more experience they get, the more developed their technique is, and how much they can improve in less than 24 hours.
So what's something very technical that you could, maybe a technical piece of advice, palpation, or something that you could like give to these, let's say, doctors who are struggling with something?
The big thing is that you have to have a solid foundation, and there's certain elements of the Gonstead work that will be the same for no matter what doctor is applying the system. And once you have that solid foundation, then you can develop into your own chiropractor. But you first have to have that solid foundation, which is there's certain elements of making, whether it's a cervical adjustment, a thoracic, a lumbar, or a pelvic adjustment, there's certain mechanical ways that it has to be done in order to make the correction the way it's necessary. And so as we teach students, or in my case in specific, I have to unlearn some of the things that I have learned how to make the adjustment, because that fits me, but it was based on the foundation that Dr. Gonstead laid.
So there's this foundation that is like the word foundation does all the speaking for itself, a foundation, but on top of that there's room for individualism, like that's however big you are, however old you are. So how long did it take to find that balance for someone? Like like for me, if I was to learn something, it would be different than if Dr. Mikey was to learn something.
That's correct.
But we're on the same foundation. So how do I go through finding my balance between me and the foundation?
Yeah. Well, everybody is a little bit different, but it's like they talked last night in the beginning session with the doctors last night, that 5-10 years before you finally realize that you have to make some refinements in how you make the adjustment based on the foundational elements that you were taught about how to make it work.
You say 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, 5 to 10 years, yeah. And even now, after 40 plus years in practice, there's still times where I say, wow, why didn't I figure this out a long time ago? You see something that you realize that this is a better or an easier way to make the adjustment for me. But it's all based on that concept that Dr. Gonstead taught us about the level disc concept.
Could you go ahead and unpack what is the level disc concept?
The level disc concept says that the subluxation occurs at the disc level, not at the joint level, not at the facets. It occurs at the disc, where the nucleus has been pushed left, right, forward, backwards, and causing the vertebrae to twist and or tilt in certain specific directions. And so when you make the adjustive thrust, it has to be to try and center the vertebrae on top of that nucleus correctly, to try and bring it back to more of its neutral position. So that can only be accomplished one way, and that is you have to be on the exact right vertebrae in the exact right direction. So your hand placement, finger placement, and your position as a doctor has to be in a very specific place, unique to that patient every time.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Why the disc and not the facet?
Well, because, I guess I really can't answer that one from why Dr. Gonstead came up with that concept, but when you look at the biomechanics of the joint, you can understand that makes more sense than the facet. And that's where what they call the G note is you can hear the big ka-thunk, and Dr. Gonstead always said that was the vertebrae setting on the disc, and just the tiny little cracks and snaps like when you do your knuckles and stuff, that's more just the facet moving.
Sorry, could you say that again? And this time direct it towards me.
Okay.
Yeah. So the difference between, what was it, the disc and facet?
The disc and facet, and also adding on to that, is it because it's more weight bearing? Does that have a play in it?
Well, I am
over here, so.
yeah.
So
I imagine that could have some impact on it. That would be a logical conclusion that because it's more weight bearing. But I never asked Dr. Gonstead, and maybe some of the other doctors have an answer to that one of why the disc and not the facet, where the subluxation is caused or where the correction needs to be made. But it's obvious that the disc concept was pretty spot on. Here we are almost 100 years into Dr. Gonstead's career from the start of his chiropractic graduation. That 1923, Dr. Gonstead graduated from chiropractic college. So.
Wow, 100 years. I didn't
Yeah.
know that way. And you've been doing it for 40, you said?
Yeah, 42.
So almost half of
Yeah.
that time span we're just talking about.
Yeah. So well, I was very fortunate that Dr. Gonstead was still alive when I started my chiropractic career in 1975.
So when you started in 1975, and this legend, well, I guess at
Uh-huh.
that time just the big
Yeah.
dog.
Yeah.
What was your? Did you think like I need to meet that guy, or how can I? For you starting out, in regards to Dr. Gonstead when
Uh-huh.
he's alive, What was your, I would say, like, image, or what was the general consent of who this guy was?
He just, how would I say that? You know, Dr. Gonstead was a very mild-mannered person. You know, he wasn't arrogant. He just talked. You understood that when he said something, he knew what he was talking about. That there was no doubt in his mind that what he was doing was the right thing. And as I went in the 70s, when they had the Gonstead seminar, you had to go through class A, B, C, D before you even got to attend and sit in a class with Dr. Gonstead. So you didn't just get to be a student first time coming and sit in Dr. Gonstead's class. You had to learn what Dr. Gonstead had laid out as the foundation before you could get to converse with Dr. Gonstead. So.
And did you go through those steps you just laid out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so when I got the opportunity to be in Dr. Gonstead's class, and some of my fellow students wanted Dr. Gonstead to adjust my neck because they were all having such difficult time trying to get my neck adjusted. And so we were sitting in the pit, as they called it, where Dr. Gonstead did his class, and he did his analysis, scoped me, motion palpated me, and determined which segment needed to be adjusted. And he didn't get it the first time. He said, "This is a tough one, boys." And so his second attempt, he got it adjusted, and students are all like, "Wow!" And the field doctors are just they're amazed that even the greatest chiropractor in the planet, as far as they were concerned, didn't get an adjustment the first attempt.
What was it about your neck that was?
And that created a reality to me is that you never ever get frustrated because you can't make the adjustment the first attempt. Dr. Gonstead said, never question the principle, but question your application. So it taught me that there's more than one way to make the correction, and hand placement, doctor placement, patient position placement are so vitally important to make sure that the adjustment is done with minimal force to get maximum correction.
What was it about your neck that was so difficult for everybody?
I'm very, very, back in my younger days, I was so almost like hypermobile. So I had so much flexibility in my neck that they could never get me to what some doctors call bring it to tension before you make the adjustment. And so Dr. Gonstead had to modify to adapt to my flexibility to make the adjustment that my fellow students could never get to that point because they didn't have enough experience to know how to make that change.
So I'm going to touch on something you said earlier, and that was that it can take 5 to 10 years to start to get good at this. So how can young Gonstead chiropractors, within the first 5 years of practice, how can we have confidence that we're doing the best for the patient in front of us, knowing that it takes that long?
Yeah, well, you just have to, I never lost that. I always had that. I always felt that if this is difficult, then I want to be the best I can. And I never stop thinking that I can do the best I can do for the patient. And never afraid to admit to the patient that, you know what, we're going to get it. You just have to stick with me. I'll figure out how to make it done right. So you just have to stay the course and just try. You know, when you make that adjustment and it doesn't work the way you feel it needs to work, you have to change your position, the patient's position, change the position of your hand, your finger, your foot, whatever. Change something just a slight amount. So it's like if I'm going to slide my hand across a piece of paper across the table like this, it'll go pretty good. But if I lift up the edge here, it creates more friction on the paper as I try to slide it across the paper, across the table. So, and if I go this way, then it causes friction, especially if I want it to go that way. So just subtle change in how you apply the force, and sooner or later, the more experience, more adjustments you make, the more you'll realize how exact you have to be to get the correction. So persistence, and I had a never give up attitude. So if it was difficult, that meant that I'm going to be even better at it, because it takes hard work. It takes a lot of work. There's still, even after 40 years of being a chiropractor, there's times where I say, God, I knew that. How come I didn't get it? So.
Cool. Anything else?
So earlier you said, like, Gonstead had this, he wasn't arrogant, but he had this authority when he spoke.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, the sheer number of hours he spent applying chiropractic that gives him that authority? Was it the mind that he had, the previous, the engineering mind that he had, or a combination of those things? What was it that gave him that authority?
He was able to innately connect with every person that was in front of him that needed a chiropractic adjustment. He would, when Dr. Gonstead saw a new patient, the only thing Dr. Gonstead never saw the consultation, the exam findings, or the x-rays until after he scoped and palpated the patient. And then he told the patient what was wrong, and then he looked at the exam findings and said, well, I guess I was right. So what he found when he touched that patient, there's just a knowing that he had, that when he was had a person before him, when after he scoped him and palpated him, he knew exactly what was needed. So did he gain that? Because so in the late 70s, he'd already been a chiropractor for 50 years. So he had 50 years of experience to get to what I saw. So, but as the history books show, that it was in the 30s already where he was seeing 100 plus patients a day. And so in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, he was seeing 300 patients a day. Dr. Gonstead never went to bed and got up in the same day for 30 plus years of his career.
Oh, wow, when you put it that way.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to add? Either to future chiropractors or any kind of last thoughts you have about Gonstead, this clinic?
Yeah, there's I have I have 8 grandkids, and I have 2 sons. And after I was married and had my boys, I would bring my sons with me and my wife. And my sons just totally enjoyed it. I remember one experience, one time we were here, and the Caracol Inn was still here in Mount Horeb. And they would have the Saturday night, they would have a slight buffet, and they'd have a DJ and live music, and they would dance in the basement of the Caracol. They had a little meeting room down there. And one occasion that it was when what they call break dancing was a big thing in the late 80s and stuff. And I had my 10-year-old oldest son was 10 at the time, I think, and he would doing break dancing, and all the doctors were just really amazed at it. And another time when my youngest son was only 5 or 6, and he came down with an extreme fever. And so we brought him down, and Dr. Doug checked him and adjusted him and says, well, you bring him back in an hour. Took 4 adjustments before the adjustment held and the fever went away. But Dr. Doug checked and adjusted him every hour for 4 hours. So sometimes we become impatient with results because we're not consistent enough in checking to make sure the vertebrae is holding the adjustment like we want it to, so that we can see the results that we want to have. So you have to, I think that even though Dr. Gonstead said too many doctors just too much too often, but not enough doctors check often enough to make sure that they need to be adjusted. So that doesn't mean that every time they're there they need to be adjusted, but they need to be checked more frequently to make sure that you're on course with when they do need an adjustment, so that you can have and achieve the long-term stay put value that we're after.
Sorry, could you just say that phrase again? Dr. Gonstead said, not too many doctors don't.
Yeah.
Could you just
Dr. Gonstead said, too many of you boys adjust too many times too often.
Not the second half.
Yeah. I'm not following.
Oh, what was the second half? And not enough of you.
Not enough of you check the patient often enough to determine when they need to be adjusted.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, you bet.
Thank you, Dr. Gabbard.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Doc.